Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Climate, a weekly webcast series from ecoAmerica featuring dynamic discussions with local and national leaders. We offer diverse perspectives and bring forth the latest thinking and best practices for building public support and political resolve for equitable climate solutions in the U.S. Please engage with us online using the hashtag Let's Talk Climate. I'm Reverend Carol Devine. I'm an ordained minister in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and I am the director of BlessedTomorrow, which is a program, the faith program at ecoAmerica. And I'm joining you today from my home in Lexington, Kentucky, on the traditional lands of the Adena, Hopewell, Yuki, Shawnee, and Cherokee people. And I am so honored today to be joined by Reverend Dr. Margaret Bullitt-Jonas. Margaret is an Episcopal priest, an author, a retreat leader, and a climate activist. She's also just a wonderful partner of BlessedTomorrow and a great colleague and friend. So welcome, Margaret. So glad to have you today. So I'm just going to jump in. The very first sermon you ever preached calling Christians to place care for the earth at the center of our faith was in 1989. And that wasn't even a year after your ordination. So you have not stopped basically since you were ordained in this field of faith and climate. You have authored or contributed to many books on the subject, included one of my favorites, Rooted and Rising, Voices of Courage in a Time of Climate Crisis, which you edited with our mutual friend, Reverend Dr. Leah Shade. And most recently, you assembled a liturgical resource for the season of creation, which we are in right now, along with Reverend John Elliott Lean. So can you tell us a little bit about what is the season of creation?
Thank you, Carol. Yes, season of creation is a special season between September 1st, the World Day of Prayer for Care of Creation, and October 4th, which is the feast day of Francis of Assisi, who is often called the patron saint of ecology. And it began, it's a special season in which Christians particularly focus on praying, preaching, acting, advocating on behalf of the natural world that God entrusted to our care. And it began actually back in 1989, in that September 1st, when the patriarch, ecumenical patriarch, declared an Orthodox day of prayer for God's creation. And then over the years, thanks to the National Council of Churches and the Roman Catholic Church, September 1st became the first day of a whole month-long season in which today millions and millions of Christians of all denominations around the world are lifting up together their prayers and their actions on behalf of God's creation. If you go to seasonofcreation.org, you'll find lots more information and resources, and it's updated every year.
Yes, thank you so much. I am a pastor. I pastored a couple of congregations for 14 years, and I really enjoyed during the season of creation myself. Had a lot of fun with it. It's a great time to experiment and bring in some new and fun things into worship. But with all the preaching and teaching and writing that you do on creation, are there things in this resource that are new or excite you in some way?
I have to say I'm really happy about this new resource, and I am indebted to my colleague, John Elliott Lean, who did heroic work in putting it together. The two of us spent a long time working on it. So there are three things I just want to mention in particular that I cherish about it. One is it begins with a very short 4-page creation care theology primer, which quickly reviews what kind of ecological and climate crisis are we in? How does Christian faith address this crisis? What are our theological and spiritual teachings about the natural world? And finally, what are the key actions we can take? So that's one piece I cherish. And it's so short, you could use it for group study or reflection. A second thing I cherish is it's packed with readings and prayers and blessings and liturgies from a whole range of sources, all of which lift up the sacredness of God's creation. And finally, my favorite part is an examination of the prayers of the people in the Episcopal Church's Book of Common Prayer, which in my view, many of these prayers are essentially anthropocentric. They focus only on praying for humankind, humanity.
Yeah.
So in these prayers, in these new form of the prayers, we're asking, when we pray for the suffering and the dead, is it not possible that we might also enlarge our prayers to pray for suffering species, or pray for the well-being of all creatures, and pray and mourn the extinction of other species? And when we bless the people whose lives are closely linked with ours, can we not enlarge our prayers to bless all the creatures and all the elements of the natural world whose lives are closely linked with ours? And I'm finding that once you start praying like that, with that kind of larger embrace of God's whole creation, there's really no going back.
Yeah.
So I love that bit in particular.
Yeah, I love that as well. That's just beautiful. This resource is based on year C of the lectionary for the month of September through October 4th, which is about to end. And of course, there are lots of preachers who are not confined by the lectionary. And so can anyone use this guide? Is there a way? Do you have preaching tips for those who are restricted by the lectionary? What might you say about that?
Well, thank you. One thing I want to say is we're hoping next year, the big dream is to enlarge this resource so that it includes all 3 years of the lectionary. But I have to say that once you understand that climate change is an emergency, you're going to take every opportunity to build moral courage and spiritual resilience in your congregation. We don't have to wait for the supposedly perfect lectionary text before we begin to preach about the climate crisis. And, in the same way, if we knew that our house was on fire, we wouldn't wait for the perfect moment to start putting out the flames. So just here's some resources. On my website, revivingcreation.org, I've posted something like 100 lectionary-based sermons about creation care and climate change. There's also a new ecumenical website called Preaching for God's World, which gives weekly sample sermons based on the lectionary. And you'll also find some wonderful resources at EcoPreacher 123, which is created by our friend Leah Shade and Rabbi Yonatan Nerel. So there are lots of great resources out there to preach based on the lectionary. And I'll just quickly give you some super fast preaching tips. Number one, lead with your faith, lead with your theology. We need to frame the climate crisis in terms of our religious and spiritual convictions and values, not as being primarily a political or an economic challenge. It's a spiritual and religious challenge. Secondly, in our sermons, we need to make space for grief. We're living in a time of rapid and traumatic change, and people in the pews need to acknowledge our grief and our anger, and we need to feel the supportive presence of a gathered community and of a loving God. And finally, in all my sermons, I try to couple urgency with agency. The crisis is urgent, but there is so much that we can do to reduce suffering and to create a more beautiful world, the world that our hearts know is possible. So I always mention at least one thing that we can do. And I will just say that these days, one thing I'm always mentioning in my talks and sermons is this opportunity created by Green Faith, which is offering us a worldwide campaign called Faiths for Climate Justice, in which between October 2nd and November 6th, which is the eve of the next UN climate talks at COP27, people of all faiths around the world are going to hold events to proclaim the sacredness of God's earth and of all God's people. And in these events, we're going to call for an immediate end to new fossil fuel projects and to deforestation and to fossil fuel financing. So a good climate sermon emphasizes that everyone has an active role to play, and a preacher can help listeners to find their place in the movement.
Oh, yes. We were created for a time such as this, and we all can take part and are all needed. I just want to lift up that the season of creation is a Christian, an ecumenical, but Christian honoring of creation. And so I'm just wondering what advice you would have to clergy of other faiths on this.
Yeah, thank you. I think not just clergy, but practitioners of every faith tradition, we have to ask ourselves, what are the gifts that our tradition can bring to the table in the face of the rapid unraveling of the web of life? Every religious tradition, including Christianity, needs to sift through its teachings and its practices and its rituals to find the gold, those elements of deep ecological wisdom that the human community so desperately needs. So what is the ecological wisdom at the heart of my tradition? And at the same time, where does my tradition need to be critiqued? And I say this as a Christian in all humility. There are places in our tradition we need to repent. So where does our tradition need to be critiqued? Where does it need to be transformed so that it can meet the challenges of this planetary crisis? How does this unprecedented moment in human history challenge our faith tradition, whatever it may be, to evolve so that we can truly serve the common good? And so for me, the bottom line is caring for God's creation should be woven into every aspect of our congregational life, into our teaching, our education and preaching and action and worship. So I'm looking for the day when every season is celebrated as season of creation, not just limited to one little 5-week span, but we understand this is something we do year round. And I'll close by saying I'm very grateful to Blessed Tomorrow for your resources and for your support.
Thank you so much. And I couldn't agree more that there isn't a one day Earth Day or one season of creation, but every single day. So thank you. And I can't believe that we need to wrap up now, but it has been such a blessing, as always, to be with you, Margaret. And I look forward to working again in the future. So thank you for spending this time with us and for your faith and for your climate leadership. We are so, so grateful. And to the listeners, please check out the description below. Tell us what you think. Engage with us online using the hashtag Let's Talk Climate, and be sure to subscribe and follow Blessed Tomorrow for the latest thoughtful leadership resources and episodes on climate action and advocacy. From all of us at ecoAmerica and Blessed Tomorrow, thank you for being with us. People of faith are the perfect leaders for climate solutions, and we all stand together on God's holy ground. We need everyone every day. Thank you.